As Michael mentioned there in that beautiful prayer, we are going to continue our study tonight over the life of Christ, and we are nearing in on some of the final stages now of the life of Christ. Tonight we're going to get to basically the 6-month mark of his life, his final 6 months of his life while on earth. And so we are starting to approach the... there's a lot that we're going to unpack in the final week, but we're starting to get closer and closer to that. And so kind of as we continue through our study, be thinking of this is only a short period. I mean, when you think about 6 months, everyone loves to make New Year's resolutions, and then you hit June and you're like, man, it's already June? Okay, 6 months, right? That's how much longer Jesus essentially has around that until he is going to make that final departure in, and then also, as we know, be crucified on a cross. So last week, as a quick recap, or the last 2 weeks really, we've talked a lot about forgiveness. Last week we really talked about it. As a quick recap, I think it's safe to say that people love to debate a lot of different things, a lot of different ideas, a lot of different theories, a lot of different things here and there. And people, one of the most common things that people debate, especially in a religious setting, would be things needed to be saved, things that you need to do, things you don't need to do, this, that, and the other, right? And I think it's interesting the things that people will debate or not debate, but one thing that I don't know if I've ever heard in debate is anyone talk about forgiveness. And that's something we talked about a lot last week. Jesus pretty clearly and plainly says that if you're not forgiving your brothers, then you shouldn't be expecting to be forgiven yourself. And that's pretty clear, because if we can't expect forgiveness at the end time, at our final day and our judgment day, then what's going to be our outcome? It's not going to be good. And so it's more of an importance of we need to be showing forgiveness. And last week we talked about how many times we should forgive somebody. If they come to us 7 times in a day, you should forgive them every single time. But there's a key. The forgiveness has to be coming from where? It's coming from the heart. So it's not just something verbal that you say just to kind of mark it off a list. It's not just something that you do because I should do this. It's coming from the heart. It's genuine. You mean it. You're doing it because you want unity in the fellowship. You're doing it because you care for the other person. You're doing it because you know that Jesus has forgiven you for so many things. There is so often in life that we can fail to forgive others, and then in the next breath or by the end of that day, we're sitting there going to God in prayer asking Him that, can you please forgive me of this? Or this or that, right? And then yet we're failing to forgive our brother or our sister over something sometimes even smaller than that. And the story that we looked at last week was over the different people that owe different amounts of money. And the one servant that is forgiven, I forgot what the number was now after I did I added the inflation rate to it to make it more realistic for today. I think it was 16 million. Does anybody remember? Was it 16 million? I think is how much he owed. It was something insane. I don't know. I'm not paying it off anytime soon if that's me. The other guy was around 800 if it was inflation, right? We got some ballpark chances of getting off $800 in debt. 16 million, that's a different story. But the difference is the person that owed 16 million was forgiven, but he was failing to forgive the person that owed him $800 in our time. And so the point is we need to be forgiving because we have been forgiven so much from the Father. So we need to be passing off that forgiveness. So with that in mind, we now move into what we're going to mostly focus on tonight, which is all going to come from John 7. We might reference here and there, but we're mostly going to spend our time in John 7. And starting in verse 1, it says, "After this, Jesus went about in Galilee. He would not go about in Judea because the Jews were seeking to kill him." Now, how long had the Jews been seeking to kill Jesus? Since birth. This is something he has his entire life. From the moment that there is any kind of proclamation that he has been born, they are seeking to kill him, seeking to stop him. When is the last time they seek to kill him? The very last time it takes place. And he knows the time, and he's going to say it in this passage we're going to study tonight, the time has not yet come. Eventually he's going to say the time has now come. And he acknowledges that it's now here. And of course, they're seeking to kill him still. So this is something that you see all throughout it. They are always seeking to stop him. Notice they don't seek to stop so many other people, right? Why are they trying to stop him? They know that it's a direct threat to their power and to all those different things. Hey, y'all. We find ourselves in John 7 tonight. And so it says he would not enter there because they were seeking to kill him. Verse 2, now the Jews' feast of the booths was at hand. So his brothers said to him, leave here and go to Judea, that your disciples also may see the works you are doing. For no one works in secret if he is to be known openly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world. For not even his brothers believed, some say brethren, believed in him. Jesus said to them, my time has not yet come, but your time is always here. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify about it, that its works are evil. You go up to the feast, I am not going up to this feast, for my time has not yet fully come. So as you start looking at this, does anybody know how long or how, well, you can go either way, I'll give you a hint, how many months after and how many months before the Feast of the Tabernacles or the Feast of the Booths is before the Passover or after the Passover? I'm giving you a hint if you can read. There you go. It's about 6 months. That's how we can somewhat timestamp this. You get it because it's 6 months before, 6 months after. I mean, it's like a light just went off. And so it kind of puts it somewhere in September, October. So it's about 6 months before, 6 months after the Passover. So that's kind of how we can place about where this is in Jesus' life and how much longer he's going to have. And so as you have this, it's now at hand. And so it says, so his brothers said to him, leave here and go to Judea so that your disciples may see the works you are doing. So you have to think at this point, you have to kind of think about what we've studied over the past maybe month or two. But the 12 had been instructed to confess his messiahship. The 12 have seen a whole lot of different things. You think about in the past, you could even say in the past 6 months, the 12 have seen transfiguration. 3 of them have seen the transfiguration, but they've seen a whole host of other things as well. But thousands of other people, thousands of other disciples have not really seen a miracle in about 6 months or so. And so they've not really seen anything. He's actually not even been to Judea and even longer than that. And so people have not been seeing things. So here his brothers are saying, you need to go and you need to go show your works. And then in verse 4 it says, for no one works in secret if he seeks to be openly known. If you do these things, show yourself to the world. So if you think about this from a worldly standpoint, what they are thinking is if you need to be known, if people need to know who you are so they can be saved, if they can hear the truth, then you need to be out doing these works so everyone can see them. Now in hindsight, why is Jesus not necessarily going here or there or showing these things or doing this, that, or the other? Is there any thought behind it from Jesus? The time has not yet come, right? The answer is in verse 8. And so he may not go a certain place. He may not do a certain thing because the time has not yet fully come. But they're looking at it, of course, from a worldly standpoint, and I think most of us would probably take a similar one. And then it says in verse 5, it says, for not even his brothers believed in him. Now, some translations are going to say brethren, so we could sit here and debate whether this means his biological brothers or someone in his family, like a cousin. You look at different scholars, they're going to go back and forth. The point is, though, there's going to be some close to Jesus. There's going to be some in Jesus' family that do not believe, even up going in towards the later part. Which, when you really stop and you think about it, in my mind, it's almost insane to think that people are that close to Jesus and they're still failing to see it because they've seen, they're seeing all these things, right? And so people close to Jesus are failing to see it. And so then it says, in verse 6, Jesus said to them, my time has not yet come, but your time is always here. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify about it, and its works are evil. If you ever wonder why Christians get persecuted, why the world wants to shut Christians down, and why they don't want us to speak, and there's your answer right there in verse 7. Is the world going to try to shut you down if you say the things of the world? Is the world going to shut you down if you're doing the works of the world? Is the world going to shut you down if you belong to the world? No, they're going to prop you up like they never propped up anything. They're going to put a spotlight on you. That way more people can see it. Sometimes we're going to face persecution. Sometimes we're going to face hatred, not because of necessarily who we are. It's because who we belong to. what we are showing, and exactly what it says right here. Because we testify about it, speaking of the world, that its works are evil. What are we called to do as Christians? What are we called to be? A light. What does a light do?
It shines.
Boy, does it shine. It needs to be shining bright, right? What's the world? Is the world dark today? Has it been dark? Was it dark during this time? There's a lot of dark spots. And sometimes we can fall into a mindset of thinking the world is getting darker and darker by the day, which I guess in a sense it is. But it's not too dark for the light to overcome it. And that's what we have to remind ourselves of. It's never too dark for the light to overcome it until Jesus decides he's going to return, and then we know that all of our work has been done. But until that moment, our work has not been done. We don't need to turn off the light. We don't get to retire from being a light. We carry that all the way up until the very end, until we draw our final breath. But we need to be testifying about the works. The works of the world are evil. And so it goes on to say in verse 8, "You go up to the feast, I am not going up to the feast, for my time has not yet fully come." Again, people are seeking to kill Jesus. People are seeking to shut down Jesus because he is testifying the truth. He's going against the world. When you think about the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the rest of kind of the Jewish sects that were going on there, what was one thing that they were struggling to give up? Because when Jesus' teaching came, it was power, it was authority, even some greed in there. I mean, all those different things that we very well can struggle with, right? We could struggle with pride, and then if you go back to last week, because of our pride, maybe we don't forgive a brother or a sister. Because of our pride, maybe we keep just running in, up against a concrete wall, even though that concrete wall ain't moving anytime soon, and we won't change course, right? All those different things. But Jesus tells them, "You go up to the feast, I'm not going, because my time's not yet come." And as we scroll into verse 9, it says, "After saying this, he remained in Galilee." So we can kind of see that the caravan or the people are going to start heading off. There's going to be a group of people that are going to head off. And then in verse 10 it says, "But after his brothers had gone up to the feast, then he also went up," not publicly, but in private. So he didn't go with the masses, he went up in private. And then in verse 11 it says, "The Jews were looking for him at the feast and saying, 'Where is he?' And there was much muttering about him among the people." Some versions will say there's multitudes that are murmuring about him. And then it says, "While some said, 'He is a good man,' others said, 'No, he is leading the people astray.' Yet for fear of the Jews, no one spoke openly of him." There's a lot we can unpack here in these short, 3 verses, I guess is what it is. So his brothers go up, and then Jesus goes up in a private manner, so not with them. And notice that the Jews were looking for him at the feast. Now, sometimes, as you can see with Nicodemus, there is maybe some good intent. They're wanting to see more. They're wanting to learn more. Maybe they have questions. Others have very ill intent. And they say, "Where is he?" And there was much muttering, there was much murmuring among the people. And so it kind of gives us this mindset of there's almost groups or people, not necessarily individuals going against one another, but more groups standing up and saying, "He's a good man." And then this group or this town over here say, no, he's leading people astray. Does it sound like the world today? Yes. Now, I'm not going to say the world today is going to be like, "Oh, Jesus is leading people astray." That's maybe not necessarily. They would just say, "Well, Jesus isn't even real," is what they would say. Or, "You all need to get with the time," is maybe what they would say. Something maybe a little bit different than this. But the point is they would even, in a roundabout way, they'd be saying that Christianity is leading people astray. Right? Y'all are living in the old time. It's kind of what the world is saying. You need to come to a newer standard. We've changed. We've evolved, is maybe what the world would say. This sounds just like the world today. Listen to verse 13. "Yet for the fear of the Jews," in our world, maybe you could say, "Yet for the fear of the people around us, no one spoke openly of him." Let us never fail to speak about Jesus for fear of what other people may think or even feel. If there's this debate going on where people are saying, oh, he's good or he's bad, guess what? We need to be the one talking about how good Jesus is. And we don't need to be, oh yeah, he is so good, and staying with just the group that says he's good, right? Oh, we can puff each other up. We can talk. It's a safe space, right? When we're here with other brothers and sisters. PTP is starting today. Does it officially start today? It officially starts on Friday. There's the early period, I guess, that starts today. The point of the matter is, when you're inside that convention center at PTP, boy, it is so easy to be in a good mood. It is so easy to feel so confident and so strong because you're surrounded by 4,000 to 5,000, or however many years it's going to be this year, other Christians that all have the same or similar mindset. But then you get out in the world, and all of a sudden you find people don't have that same mindset all around you. Now you find yourself in the minority. When there's this conversation going on, let us not fail to speak about Jesus, but also let us not fail to just stay in our group of people that agree with us. Let us be bold. Let us speak boldly of the gospel and go. That was so bold right there. It scared the microphone. Scared me a little bit too. My heart's racing. We're all good. So let us speak boldly of the gospel and the truth found in the gospel is where I was going with this, to the opposing group. So often we can get afraid of that because we'll fall into the mindset of, well, they won't believe anyways. They won't listen anyways. They'll hate me. I'll be censored. I could lose my job. And we just go down this whole laundry list of things that could happen. And they may not even happen, right? But we think all these X, Y, and Z could all happen. The point is it doesn't matter. We need to be speaking of the truth because God is going to provide in the end. So we need to be speaking of the truth. So let us not have that fear of what man could do. Dale and I have mentioned this, I think, for the past 2 or 3 months now. What is the worst that mankind can do? Kill you. Awesome. What does that mean for a Christian? Our reward is even sooner, I guess, now, right? Now we don't have to live in this world, and go back and listen to Dale's sermon on what happens. Was it titled What Happens When We Die? What happens when we die? Go back and listen to that for further context on it. But what's the worst they can do? Now, what's the worst that Jesus could do? It's not just the physical, it's also the what? The spiritual side of it, right? So let us not be afraid of the world. The worst they can do is kill us, and then we just get closer to our reward. So how terrible. Paul had a great mindset of that, right? It didn't matter what you did to Paul. Paul was just going to keep on preaching the word until his time was finished. And so in verse 14 it says, about the middle of the feast, Jesus went up into the temple and began teaching. So the Feast of the Tabernacles, or Feast of the Booths, lasted about 8 days. So the middle's around the 3rd or the 5th day, kind of depending on how you're going to slice it up. So though Jesus went up quietly, he didn't go up with the main group, he went up privately, he still comes in and starts teaching boldly. Now, this could possibly maybe suggest a fulfillment of some of the stuff in Malachi, maybe Malachi 3:1, possibly. The point is that Jesus, as he comes in, he comes privately. He doesn't come with the rest of the group. He still goes in and he teaches at the midpoint of the feast that is going on. And in verse 15 it says, the Jews therefore marveled, saying, how is it this man has learning when he has never studied? Now, has Jesus studied? He has studied, has he not? He even studied among some of these teachers. If you go back to some of the earlier stories that we've gone over at the beginning, he had definitely studied. And we could go into kind of the Jewish tradition of what they had to study growing up. But it was that his teaching was beyond that. It was beyond whatever their teaching had been. It was beyond whatever he would have studied and what someone else would have known. His teaching goes beyond that. And you see that all throughout. When people hear Jesus, the phrase, they marveled, or something along that lines, happens very commonly. And so it says, the Jews therefore marvel, saying, how is it that this man has learning when he has never studied? Verse 16, so Jesus answered them, my teaching is not mine, but his who sent me. So it's not that you've taught me. It's not that someone else has taught me. It's not that I've opened up a textbook and I've learned it all myself. It's what? It's from the one who sent me. Verse 17, if anyone's will is to do God's will, he will know whether the teaching is from God or whether I'm speaking of my own authority. If your intention is to do the will of God, you're going to know. Then he goes on to say, the one who speaks on his own authority seeks his own glory. But the one who seeks the glory of him who sent him is true, and in him there is no falsehood. Now, when you think about Jesus, what were his brothers just asking him to do? Now, you go up there and you show them some signs. Now, you go back even further that into the and earlier in the life of Christ. What were people wanting to do when Jesus has fled numerous times from them? What were they wanting to make him? King. Does Jesus take up the offer? Does Jesus take up the offer whenever Satan is tempting him to give him everything? No. Why? Because he was not seeking it for himself.
Isn't it easy to see the comparison between David's brothers and Jesus' brothers?
Yeah. It really is. And when you look at, that's a good point about David's brothers. And we're going to see it here in a handful of verses as well. But some of them are going to, we studied this maybe 2 months ago too, some of them will put down Jesus because of where he's from or who his parents are. Well, you just can't be good enough. You're from, this little old town, or your parents are just a carpenter, this, that, and the other, right? It doesn't matter. It didn't matter for David. When you're on God's side, you're on God's side. And so it says, he's not seeking his own glory, but the one who seeks the glory of him who sent him is what? Is true. And in him there is no falsehood. Verse 19 it says, has not Moses given you the law, yet none of you keeps the law. Why do you seek to kill me? Don't you love it how Jesus just gets straight to the point on some of these things? You're sitting here seeking to kill me, and Jesus is like, it seems to remind me that maybe you're not supposed to do this. Maybe this is something we shouldn't be doing. But there's also so many things. What have they done to the prophets of old? Jesus is going to hit on this later on. What have they done to the prophets of old? Well, they killed them too. And Jesus is going to be no different. And Jesus knows that. And that's why as you're looking and you're reading this and you're hearing it, 6 months from now, this is all going to take place. And Jesus knows that. Jesus has known that. And now these people are still trying to figure out necessarily what's going on, even as apostles are still piecing stuff together. But it says, there is no falsehood. He is true. Who's he speaking to here? Yep. So he's here. Jews are hearing this. You have to even think Pharisees, Sadducees, all of them are looking to him. Who's he called out numerous times? Whose house did he go into and then call him out? Right? The Pharisees' house. He even went to the Pharisees' house and called them out in their own house. That was maybe about 3 months ago when we looked at that one. There's falsehood. What have they been doing? They've been adding extra things. They've really shown a lack of love and a lack of forgiveness, which is what Jesus just touched on, right? They are holding a hot iron to a lot of people. And then it's when he talks about Moses. He says, you're not even keeping the law. Then it goes in verse 20, the crowd answered him, you have a demon. Who is seeking to kill you? Don't you love it? Internally all these folks are like, who's seeking to kill him, right? And there is people just sitting there among them. There's their religious leaders that are seeking to kill him. People have been trying to kill him for 30 plus years at this point. His whole lifehood, people have been trying to stop him and kill him. And so it says in verse 21, Jesus answered them, I did one work, and you all marveled at it. The one work is going to be coming from, or you can read it from John 5, going 2 through 9. It says this, now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, in Aramaic called Bethesda, where has 5 roofed colonnades, and these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, he said to him, do you want to be healed? I believe Dale actually did a lesson on this too. So go back and listen to that if it's still on YouTube. Do you want to be healed? The sick man answered him, Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. And while I'm going another step down before me, Jesus said to him, Get up, take up your bed and walk. And at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and walked. Now that day was the Sabbath, which is what Jesus is about to hit on again. So Jesus has made a teaching, or Jesus has made a healing at this point, and they marveled. And so he said, I did one work, and you all marveled at it. And then he says, verse 22, Moses gave you circumcision, not that it is from Moses, but from the fathers. And you circumcise a man on the Sabbath. If on the Sabbath a man receives circumcision, so the law of Moses may not be broken. Are you angry with me because on the Sabbath I made a man's whole body well? Do not judge by appearance, but judge with right judgment. Now, I thought we weren't supposed to judge. I could have sworn I'd heard that before, right? A lot of people will say that. A lot of people will even say, don't judge me. You're not allowed to judge me. You can't do that, right? The judgment is righteous judgment. It's right judgment. Now, if you notice the beginning part of verse 24, I think this is something that we judge a whole lot of in the world today, maybe even more than what they were judging at this time period. Do not judge by appearance. Do we see that in the world today? My goodness, do we see it everywhere. Well, I got to get all dressed up. That way people can see me. Right? I have to have all these things so people can see what I have. Don't be judging by appearance, but judge with right judgment. Sometimes the person could look maybe not the best in what the world's view would be, and they could be a wonderful, wonderful, faithful Christian, right? Yet the person that looks all propped up and looks so religious and so just perfect could be one of the furthest things from it. Because once they leave the building, they could be everything but. Once they close the door, they could be everything but. But when they get out in the world, boy, they can put on a show. So we have to be careful. We have to have right judgment. Don't be judging by appearances. But notice what Jesus is going after here. He's going straight at it. He's going straight after what they're going after. They're getting mad at him for doing something on the Sabbath prior to, yet they would have done something similar for circumcision. Look at the bigger picture is what Jesus keeps hinting his whole life. Look at the bigger picture. Kathy?
Well, if we're talking about righteous judgment, it can't be our own righteousness that we're judging God. And if it's Jesus' righteousness that we're judging God, he was more receiving of people that were really, really, that looked like they were struggling to a lot of other people. But he was harsh on the people that looked like they were doing well and they were messed up on the inside. Of course, he knew their hearts. So how can we judge about that if we don't know people's hearts?
Yeah.
And that's the thing. I mean, here's the way we need to do part of our judging is, if we're going to judge, is that we've got to get ourselves straight first. Because he said remove that log before you, and also the lady that they, the woman they put in front of him throw the first stone. We understand this. So there's not a contradiction in the teaching. The righteousness is Christ, not ours.
Yeah. And
See what I'm saying?
and the other thing is too, I think Dale, I'm going to keep mentioning Dale, I guess. I think Dale actually maybe said this on Sunday morning. Maybe it was somebody else. I don't know. I'm going to give Dale credit. I don't know. Sometimes we can say, well, in my opinion, whatever guy said that, I feel like someone said that recently. In my opinion, this, pump the brakes. In God's opinion, in God's truth, in God's word, it says this. That's the righteous judgment. It's God's word, and that's how we have to rightly divide it. That's when it's coming from the heart. That's why we're saying it, because we care about their soul. We want them to know the truth. That's the righteous judgment. Dale?
And we don't know people's hearts. What Kathy said is true. We don't know what people's hearts are. But Jesus says that we'll know them by their fruits. There are clues that we can look at to see that somebody is in distress, or somebody needs a talking to, or somebody needs, maybe some coaching up, or whatever that is. And if we're going to judge righteously, you're right, we got to compare it to the right standard. We don't compare it to other people.
And so it's always going back to God's standard. And the same thing when someone asks you a question, so what do you believe? God said, right? Sometimes, and you can see it real quick. You go up, you leave here and ask anybody what they believe, and I would almost guarantee you they all start with, well, I believe. Or they might even say, well, we believe at so-and-so place. What we should be saying, we need to make sure we're in the minds of this too, what we should be saying is, well, God said, or God believes, or God teaches, or Jesus said, what the Bible says X, Y, Z, right? It's not I believe. This is what I believe it because Jesus has said it. God has said it.
The 6 deadly words, 1 John chapter 2. I feel the lust of the flesh. I want the lust of the eye. And I think the pride of life.
Yeah, it's all. You look at the world today. I don't know what the percentage is in here, but I bet a majority of us probably have a iPhone, right? And so so many things in the world today are all about us. I forgot who I was having a conversation with earlier about this sometime last week, but everything in the world today is so self-serving. It's all coming towards, it's all what's good for me. And you can see it by so many actions in the world. We as the church need to never be like that. It's about what's good for the people around us. We're sharing Christ because Christ has been shared with us. We're sharing forgiveness because Christ has shared forgiveness with us. We're sharing love because Christ has shared love with us, right? We need to be putting others before ourselves. Didn't Christ? He sure did. And Christ went after the hard to love and the ones that the world had cast aside. And we're going to see several of those coming up in his final 6 months of his life. Jesus did not just go to the rich. Now, when he did go to the rich, he normally had a great teaching for him, as you could see. But Jesus ate with who? Sinners. Ate with tax collectors. He ate with the people that the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the Pharisees and the Sadducees got onto him for eating with them and talking to him. Jesus went to who? The people who needed healing, the people who needed a physician. Anyways, I don't know where the whole point was going with that, but the point is that they marveled at it, and we need to not be judging people by their appearance. We need to have right judgment that comes from the text. Any thoughts, comments, maybe a concern?
Well, when we're told to their righteous judgment, that means there is an unrighteous judgment, and we need to be really careful.
Yeah, there can, yeah.
Because it's a choice.
Yeah, that's a good point. So our sister up here brings up the point that if there's a righteous judgment, there must also be an unrighteous judgment. Which, if you want to look at it in this context, in this time period, who's the one having the unrighteous judgment? The people there, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, had been passing it. They've been teaching it. I mean, they're hammering down on some unrighteous judgment, holding people to the fire, I guess you could say, over things that they very well are probably doing themselves. So yes, we have to make sure on the righteous judgment, we need to make sure that we are discerning the word. We need to make sure that we're not just making emotional and quick decisions, that we have not put any thought or any prayer into. You have something, Dale?
Yeah, the Pharisees are criticizing Jesus for what he's doing, what he's teaching. And Jesus is pointing out to them, Moses gave you the law, and you're not, you're supposed to be the religious leaders, right? You're criticizing me as the religious leaders. But what are you doing? Well, thou shalt not kill. They're trying to kill Jesus, right? Thou shalt not bear false witness. What are they going to do when they do put him on trial?
Yep.
Right, so they're going to break, like half the commandments, just in the trial and persecution of Jesus and what it is they're doing. And he's kind of pointing out their hypocrisy to them. People don't generally like that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, they really are. People in this time are looking at them as the religious leaders. And here comes Jesus, and he's just laying it to them. And he's done it numerous times at this point. They are trying to hold people to things that they aren't even holding themselves accountable to. And I think sometimes you talk about unrighteous judgment, or even going off what Kathy talked about, we need to make sure we're not falling in that same thing. Oh, you're doing that? You're caught up in that? Right? And it's like we're almost shaming them, and it's like when we close the door, we're the exact same thing. We're struggling with the exact same thing, right? We need to be working with one another to grow closer to Christ. All of us can help one another. Someone here could be struggling with something, and there's another brother or sister that maybe is struggling with the same thing or has conquered the same thing. Guess what? We can help one another. That's why we're a family. Kathy?
The question also is, what is the purpose of judging? Think about that.
Yeah.
Because in Matthew 7, it says you will know them by their fruits.
Mhm.
And then over in Hebrews, it's talking about you'll know the good fruit, the bad fruit. You know, there's that comparison. But what is the purpose of judging somebody by their fruits? I mean, is it to help them?
Better be.
You see what I'm saying
Yeah.
now?
Yeah.
Is it to help them, or is it just to separate yourselves from them?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't mean that, like, I'm not talking about church discipline or whatever, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, some people will go, I'm like this, and I'm gonna stay away from that person, you see, because their fruits aren't good or whatever. And the fruit, by the way, comes from the Holy Spirit in our hearts and our minds, and it's God's fruit, not our personal fruit. And yeah, it kind of is part of us, and it's part of our fruit, but we can't have that fruit without Spirit. We cannot have that fruit without going to the Word and growing it, right? So we must be in the Word. We must be in the Word to develop that fruit.
Yeah. And I think the reason we should ever be bringing up anything with judgment, it ought to be because we care about their soul, which oftentimes I think that's not the reason why we're trying to bring something up to somebody. We're just like, they did something I don't like, or I don't know what, we think something's wrong and we're going to put them down for it, right? It needs to be because we care about their soul, and we need to be thinking about, we care about where their soul is going to spend eternity, which is something that all of us need to shift our mindset on, because it's not someone that you just dislike. Right? It's not someone that you just got a grudge with. It's not just somebody that you think is hard to love or hard to get along with. That person still has a soul that needs to be taken care of, that needs to hear Jesus. So if there's something wrong with their soul, then we need to be helping. Just like I would hope that they would help me, right? Because it's a family, right? It's not Kathy, it's not Brian, it's not Dale, it's not anybody. It's their soul. It's so much more than a name. It's their soul, and the soul has an eternal spot. And that's what we need to be focused on.
Judgment of any kind has to be based in truth.
Yep.
Asking for reasons that we judge people, that's multifaceted.
Yep.
The primary reason is to expose a truth, hopefully to gain a soul, to point out something. But there's also a darker side to that, because we are called to separate ourselves from the world. Now, if you're wanting a single reason to judge, and that's simply to reveal truth. If something is wrong, it's never going to be solved unless the truth about it is acknowledged. Judgment is never to be malevolent. It's always to expose the truth or to reveal the truth so the circumstance can be dealt with in a godly, loving way. Sometimes a godly way is you have to separate yourselves from that situation. It's not about feelings. It's not about perceptions. It's not because this person is my enemy for whatever reason. We're looking at people who are made in the image of God. And there are times when judgment enters into that dark side that we have to pull ourselves back from that relationship.
Yeah. And I think one thing with that too, sometimes you have to pull yourself back from people, as you mentioned, because it could even cause us to go astray. It could stain us. So we have to even have righteous judgment to make sure we're taking care of our own soul. One verse that a lot of people use, and I'll end on this before I turn it over to, I guess, Brian and then Mark. One verse that people always use when it comes to judgment is, well, Jesus ate with sinners. and they go on that. Did Jesus just eat with sinners? He was handing out a prescription, was he not? And so if we're going to put ourselves in that situation, we need to make sure that we have on the what? The whole armor of God. We need to make sure we're using righteous judgment. We need to make sure that we're prescribing what heals, which is Jesus. But that righteous judgment can go, as we've heard from multiple people, in a whole different ways. We've got to take care of our own soul. We need to be helping souls around us because it's all about going to heaven. And that's the main goal. And some people, we didn't get to it here, but in verse 28, it's going to say, is it verse 28? No, it's not. It's further down. It's further down in a couple verses I was hoping we were going to get to tonight. We're not even close to where I thought we were going to get to, but that's okay. But Jesus is going to say, you don't even know him. Speaking of the Father, you don't even know him. You can't even go to where I'm going. Well, it's not that they can't go. It's that their heart is not even going to be in the right place. They're not even going to be eligible to go because they won't fix where their heart is. There's going to be some people that we're going to come into contact with in the world that unfortunately have such a hard heart, they may never change it. They may never change it. Now, Saul did, so we can't just discredit people. Saul did, and he was persecuting and killing people. But there's going to be some people in this world that just will sink in and they will just never move the ground. But we cannot let that affect our soul and where we plan on going. So we must stay strong and we must make sure we have a righteous judgment and be a light to this world because we can change lives and we can help souls get to heaven through the power of Christ and the power of the gospel. So I'll end my soapbox or whatever you want to call it, and I will turn it over to Brian for song, and then Brother Marcus is going to bring us a powerful devotional. I can just feel it now. Thank y'all.
682. 682.
Jacob would mention powerful. Some of his last words regarding what's going to happen next. Because just as he was saying that, I was writing down the characteristics of God. Omnipotent. Now that's powerful, okay? Omnipresent. Everywhere, all the time. And for him, there is no time, so I don't know how to get to that, actually. Omniscient, all-knowing. Now I'm going to show you how the I am works. Okay? So let me walk up front. Now, as you know, one of the many names pertaining to God having to do with eternity, at least, is I am. So, before the foundation of the world, when God had already foreordained that his Son was going to be sacrificed for the redemption of man, before the foundation of the world. Now, I think that that's in 1 Peter 1. Okay, I think that's where that's located. So at that moment, and we've got to encase that in time, I am. Creation, I am. Moses, I am. Now, I may not get all the things in order, but I think you're seeing that God is outside of time. Jesus didn't enter time stepping onto the soil that he created. He entered time when he was born. And so things changed for him. When he was creating the world, he was I am. And still, even when he was in the world, he still was I am, but he gave up some of the stuff. Gave up some of it. So I want to kind of give you an idea in my crazy way. I want to kind of give you an idea. And I think we'll do this. So I'm going to ask Jacob to do it. Jacob, just grab a Bible there and turn to Genesis 1. And just start reading. 1:1? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In the beginning, God created the heavens.
Stop. Created has to have a beginning and an end. Now that's past tense, right? And so that's associated with time. Keep going.
God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form.
Was, another verb having to do with time.
Was without form and void, and darkness was.
Yes, same one. Keep
over
going.
the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters.
So this is describing a past tense thing that he'd already done. Go ahead. So Jesus is in the process of creating time. And so we get to Genesis day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, 5, 6, and 7. Whether you believe in God or not, you are living in the time that he created. And you abide by it. And you recognize it. 24-hour day. You put 7 of them together, you have a week. Everybody does this, wherever you live in the world. So, whether people realize it or not, they are recognizing what God created, even if it is ignorance, because they're operating in it. A month, a year, a decade, a century. I'm 3/4 of a century. Okay? I will not say anything about the women because we can't do that. Okay? And then what? A millennium? A millennium? Okay? So, whether we give God credit for doing this and for bringing his Son, who did the creation, into what he created, then he has to operate in time. About 30, 33 years or so. Somewhere in there, right? Okay? So if you go through all of Genesis chapter 1, you'll find somewhere in the neighborhood, now they're repeated, but somewhere in the neighborhood of about 30 verbs. Every one of those verbs has to do with time. Every one of them. So Jacob is always saying, what's the worst that man can do to us? And he did that tonight. He does it almost every time. And then we got a response over here. Kill me. I think that was you. Was it you? Who did that? Who said kill me? Yeah, it was you. It was you. So kill me. I don't know. I don't want to be killed, but okay. All right. That has a beginning and an end. Literally, an end. Okay? A beginning and an end. So, what I'd like to do is to try to get some feel for what eternity is like. Because however heaven is described, it's always been there. And you notice the only way that I can refer to it is using time, always, and that's as close as I can get to eternal and eternity. That's as close as I can get to it. So let's see, if Jesus is going to wipe away every tear, that's a verb, and so it has a beginning and an end. It's difficult for us to try to understand what eternity is and being eternal. But I'm a whole lot closer than some of you. Now, there are two kinds of eternity. I mean, for us, there's a beginning of it, and then it just is. And I guess it's kind of like we become, I am junior, I am junior, I'm not exactly sure how that works. But that's where we're all headed. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. I once was blind, but now I see. Do you see? Can you see inside yourself and what you need to do? Not just now necessarily, but what you need to do to conform yourself to be like I am. Everybody in here was made in His image. And so the task from our birth until our end is, oh, to be like Thee, to conform to that image. We would not have to conform if we were created to be exactly like Him. So He wanted something to do. And it happened to be us. And the ones that He's really doing with, it's us. Because we are the only part of His creation that is made in His image. And so we kind of start out, we're a work in progress. We kind of start out, you know, if you have a semi-shiny frying pan, you look at yourself and you don't show up very well. Then maybe you look at yourself in a window and you're kind of translucent. He wants us to go to a mirror and see Him in us. That's what He wants. So if you haven't been doing that, if you want to do that, this is the time when you can start doing it. Because just as when his side was pierced and blood and water came out, that baptistry up there represents both of those items. The water representing itself, and the water simultaneously representing his blood. And so, when we elect in time to be lowered into that, we reach his blood. And just as when the stone was rolled away, and just before that, he was raised from the dead, so too are we. So if that's what you need to do tonight, please do it. Please do it. If you have something that you would like for us to pray about, please do that. And all you have to do is come forward to do it. Now I'm going to mute this thing because I don't want to dominate the singing.